Hello, my beautiful children. Thank you for joining us again. We are today looking at another work by R.M. Archer, this time the first chapter of an urban fantasy-ish series, very sword and sorcery, Fritz Lieber kind of thing, which is absolutely my jam. I am looking forward to reading this. So, Slander and Steel by R.M. Archer, Chapter 1, Contessa. Contessa hesitated on the roof of one of the few two-story buildings in the city and shot a quick glance over her shoulder. She was still alone. Muffled laughter erupted from the buildings she crouched on as she crept to the gutter. The metal pole was cool beneath her fingers, a small relief from the midsummer humidity, as she slid down and landed on a pile of trash in the alleyway. Mud splashed onto her boots. She strolled to the front of the tavern and stepped inside, savoring the raucous atmosphere and the sickly sweet smell of alcohol. This place was almost like home. She made her way to the counter and saw that someone was occupying her usual seat. His face was turned away from her, but the light from the nearby fireplace gave his hair a familiar reddish tint. "You're in my seat!" Contessa set her hands on her hips. "I know." Roth spun to face her with a smirk, resting his elbows on the counter behind him. "I knew it was you." "Well, of course." Roth grinned. "I'd be disappointed otherwise." Contessa waved him aside. "Scoot over." Roth moved to the next stool over and Contessa took her seat, now warm. "How long did you wait?" Contessa flagged down the barmaid. "A while." The barmaid stepped over. "I'll have my usual," Contessa said. The barmaid nodded and left again, tripping over a broken tile and cursing as she made her way into the back room. Contessa slid Roth's mug down the bar to him and he caught it, lifted it to his lips, and took a swig. "What did you get?" Roth nodded toward the pouch at Contessa's waist. "I got what I went for. It was my job, not yours." He shrugged. "Just curious." The barmaid set a mug in front of Contessa and left. Contessa sipped her ale before setting down the mug and turning toward Roth. "You know I'm not going to tell you anything I don't want to, so why are you still here?" "Maybe I want to see if I can make you want to." He leaned closer to her and she smirked, turning to face the main room. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. "Nice try." Roth leaned back and shrugged. "It was worth that much." "Go home." "Why? Do you have some secret business to deal with? A dead body you need help hiding?" Contessa chuckled. "No." Roth drained his mug and set it on the counter with a handful of copper coins. "I'll see you back at the temple." Contessa nodded and watched him walk out of the tavern. He shot her a wink as he reached the door and she rolled her eyes in return. Once he was gone, she turned back toward the counter and waved over the barmaid. "Refill?" the girl sighed. "No, just a question. She's not back yet. Sorry." Contessa nodded, lips pursed. Thanks. Do you have any idea when she'll be back?" The barmaid shook her head. "Your best bet is to keep checking. She's rather unpredictable. I'll tell her you were looking whenever she gets back." A hint of bitterness crept into the girl's tone and she glared at the back door. "Thanks." Unpredictable. Contessa scoffed. She was entirely predictable. She hadn't been in for the last 7 months. How the other barmaids thought she'd be back or why Contessa was still asking was beyond her. She figured it was pure stubborn determination on her part. Contessa absently sipped her ale and turned toward the bar to stage. There was usually an interesting story being told, but today it was a tale of Rosencellabar she'd heard a million times. The bard wasn't one she'd seen before, but she was still tired of the story and moved on. Contessa turned her attention to the tavern's patrons, looking for anyone she hadn't seen before. That was a short list, considering how often she came, but there were a few, most of them younger faces likely just come of age. Half of them were slobbering drunk, and the other half were staring at their mugs as if they'd be kicked out if they took a sip. She smirked a bit. She turned the other direction, toward the fireplace, where the more interesting patrons tended to gather. Adventurers, bards, and anyone else with a story to tell would speak in hushed tones of long-ago wars and almost wars, reminiscing of the old days and embellishing their own tales of adventure. Tonight, however, everyone's attention was turned to the old bard telling Rosen's ballad. The fire provided more heat than necessary, and beads of sweat began to form on Contessa's skin. Contessa turned back to the bard up front, and he met her gaze with light gray eyes that seemed to stare into her soul. She hastily turned back to the bar and took another swig of ale. Her soul was too dark to be seen. When the old bard completed his tale, his words took an altogether different tone. "Now I have need of someone to go on a quest." Contessa felt his eyes on her, but refused to return his gaze. "You there, at the bar, come here." Contessa looked down the bar. There was no one else sitting there. If you want to talk to me about a job, she turned toward the bard, we can discuss business privately at the bar. The bard came over and sat down.
Very well.
Contessa shot a warning glance at everyone who turned to stare, sending them all scurrying back to their drinks. Once the buzz of conversation had returned, she set one elbow on the bar and faced the old man. His eyes still seemed to see deeper than she liked as she met his gaze. Why me?
I can tell you're perfect for the position I need filled.
And how would you know?
You're wearing 9 daggers right now, you've already drawn a 10th in case my mission turns out to be a scam, and you know how to properly talk business.
She considered his words a moment before relaxing her grip on the dagger. I'll need to know particulars.
I'll meet you here in the morning to discuss things.
Alexander moved to get up. It seems better to tell me what all this entails now and let me sleep on it than to wait unnecessarily and potentially lose my interest. The bard's eyes glittered.
Let's see if I lose your interest then, shall we? Anytime before noon tomorrow, I'll be here.
That won't work. I like to know what I'm getting myself into before I commit.
You're not committing. You're waiting.
He smirked slightly. You're testing me to see if I'm really worth hiring. His smirk broadened as he rose and headed up the stairs to the inn above. Contessa frowned. So there was no way to get any more detailed information than that unless she either waited or hunted him down. Great. She always loved dealing with people who withheld information. Contessa drained her mug in one sip before venturing into the dark streets and heading for home. All was quiet in the city since it was past midnight, and only a few sporadic street lamps were lit. Most threatened to sputter out by now. She started down the street, her feet making little noises on the stone, instinctively moving from shadow to shadow. The Temple of War loomed over her minutes later. Black spires jutted into the sky, tipped with red metal like blood on a spear. The windows were tinted glass, and ornate carvings on the red marble pillars portrayed bloody battle scenes and wars. She climbed the stairs and stepped past the ebony door, closing it softly behind her. The hinges squeaked slightly. The pews were empty and silent up to the altar. This was one of the few temples that people didn't often walk into to pray alone. Contessa turned for the steps leading into the basement, her footsteps noiseless against the ebony. When she reached the bottom, she started down the first tunnel of a dungeon long ago abandoned. Well, abandoned as far as its original purpose, for holding prisoners of war. She began to wind through the labyrinth of passages with practiced ease. The voices echoing through the stone tunnels increased in volume as she zigzagged her way closer to what had become the common hall, deftly avoiding the cobwebs and human bones littering the hallway. The doorway ahead was outlined by firelight, and a smile tugged on her lips. She was ready to spend time with the other assassins after a long day. The dungeon cells sent shivers up her spine as she slipped into the common room, but the blazing fire beckoned to her and melted the shivers away. In the tavern, the heat was excessive. Down here, it was welcome. The other 5 members of her guild sat around the fire, and Contessa moved to join them.
Welcome back, Contessa,
the oldest said. He was middle-aged, his brown hair speckled with white, and his matching eyes were full of knowledge. Thanks. She took a seat between him and a red-haired young woman. The redhead held a little boy in her lap, and her pale green eyes kept watch over him to make sure he didn't get too close to the fire. Hello, Cor, Contessa said. The little boy grinned, freckled cheeks crinkling. Hi, Cat. Contessa smiled and leaned back, supporting herself with her arms behind her. Roth smirked at her from across the fire. So what was your pressing business at the tavern? Roth asked. Not yours. Contessa turned to the oldest man. Is there any meat around here? He nodded and pointed towards the third cell on the left. Contessa stood and went to grab a couple strips of jerky before returning. The smells of jerky and smoke melded into a mouth-watering aroma as she took a bite of meat, intentionally putting Roth off. His growing impatience, evident through his staring at her and his tapping on the floor, made her smile.
How did the job go?
Durin asked, his voice rich with age. There was a hint of concern in his voice, like that of a father making sure his daughter was all right. I got what I went for. She lifted a pouch on her belt.
You can keep it.
Contessa barely nodded, careful to keep any emotion off her face. Better to not give Roth any hint. Firelight danced on the otherwise dark walls, creating intricate patterns and intertwining shadows. You're being awfully mysterious this evening, Roth smirked. Are you sure you weren't hiding a body? It's not like that would be remarkable in our line of work. Roth snorted. And what would that be? Baking cupcakes. Roth laughed, and Contessa spotted Roth's brother, Payne, hiding a chuckle of his own. Well, I know you weren't baking cupcakes. The laughter flickered from his face. Were you? Contessa smirked and rolled her eyes. No. Come on, tell us, Roth said. It's none of your business. Contessa smirked before rising and heading down the short tunnel to her room. Roth followed her and grabbed her wrist, pressing her gently against the wall. Come on, what could be so bad that an assassin won't even tell? Contessa grinned, feeling his breath on her neck as she gazed into amber eyes that almost matched her own. Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I just want to keep you guessing. Now why would you want to do that? He murmured, eyes glinting in the firelight from the common room. It gets you close. Contessa lifted up on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. He wrapped a warm, firm arm around her waist. He pulled away a moment later with a chuckle. You know you don't have to hide things from me to get me to seduce you. It's more fun this way. When the other assassins began to disperse from the fire and head to bed, Contessa broke away from Roth and stopped the eldest assassin before he left. Druin, can I talk to you for a moment? He nodded and led her into his office, the most refurbished cell in the dungeon. Stolen tapestries graced the walls, the floor was covered in expensive rugs, and a mahogany desk sat in the middle of it all with a ramshackle chair behind it made of scrap wood. Contessa cringed. That desk had been a pain to steal. The chair creaked as Druin took a seat. What is it? He set his feet up on the desk, the chair moaning with every movement. Why did you send me on this job? You know I hate inner-city assignments. Wouldn't Roth or Payne have been a better choice? Druin shook his head. I sent you for a reason. And the reason is? Druin shook his head again. You'll have to figure that out on your own. He lowered his feet and rose from his chair, coming over and kissing Contessa on the cheek. Good night. That's it? That's all I get? Druin smiled softly at her. Get some sleep. Contessa stepped out of the office, and Druin closed the door before heading to his bedroom. Contessa stared after him, irritation spreading like an itch in her arms. After a moment, she headed toward her room. Roth ran a light hand down her arm as she passed. What was that about? My job from tonight. Doesn't matter. You waited until everyone else was gone to talk to Druin. I think it matters. Not to you. She kissed him briefly. Good night, Roth. She stepped into her room, mostly closed the door behind her, and lay awake for several minutes, trying to figure out what Druin's mysterious reasoning was. After a moment, restless, she pulled a brooch out of her pouch. A bit of firelight streamed in through the slightly open door, granting her enough light to examine the pin. The base was gold, ornately carved around the edges, with a smooth amethyst in the middle. A splayed eagle was etched in gold on the center of the gem. The image was the royal emblem, seen on all of the flags around the city. She'd stolen the pin from the king's quarters on Druin's orders. She tucked it back into her pouch and set the bag on the low table next to her bed. She'd deal with it later. She rolled over to face the wall and fingered her necklace through her shirt. The necklace bore the same insignia, a fact that she'd resented since she'd been able to recognize the connection between it and the palace, but it was her only tie to her birth family. A birth family she hadn't been able to find, despite her searching. She'd been trying to find her mother for months, but the barmaid who might know something was never around. She sighed and closed her eyes, trying to shove thoughts of a useless family out of her head, and turned her imagination to other things before falling asleep. Contessa reached the tavern in the usual 15 minutes and walked straight to the counter. The heels of her boots thumped on the wooden floor, and she hesitated as she realized the same barmaid was still working this morning. Contessa got her attention anyway.
Your usual?
The maid asked, still obviously tired of being on duty. Is here in today? The maid shook her head.
Afraid not. Would you like a drink?
Just some hard cider, please. The barmaid moved away to fill the order. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the bard crossing the room with a casual air about him. He reached the bar and glanced around the room once before sitting down.
Good morning.
Morning, bard. She greeted him without looking. Alexander. Nice to meet you. Alexander inclined his head a bit. She turned to face him. So, the information? The barmaid returned with Contessa's drink. The rough wood of the mug was probably too familiar under Contessa's fingers as she took a sip.
Can I have a regular apple cider?
Alexander asked. The barmaid nodded and went to get the cider. Alexander turned to Contessa and she met his gaze, trying to ignore the invasive feel of his gaze.
You'll start by waiting for your companion to arrive from Shaynir. He's already on his way and will be here in a couple of days. From here, you'll head to Corbain, obviously stopping as necessary along the way, and talk to the king of the Rashan regarding the stop of his mines.
Katessa frowned. This whole thing is about the Rashan shutting down their mines? The Rashan were miners, hulking, muscular individuals with coarse hair and no love for foreigners, at least as far as Katessa had heard. But that was only one of the questions that came to mind. Why an elf from Shaynir? Why was she, an assassin, being sent to check out a mining problem? Why was Alessander being so vague? The barmaid returned with Alessander's drink, and he glanced at it before turning, back to Katessa.
Perhaps. Continue from there according to whatever you learn from the Rashan.
Katessa took another swig of her drink. And why do I have to have a companion?
Are you really so confident as to think that climbing over the tallest mountain range in the harshest part of the country is comparable to climbing a 3-story building to pilfer some coins?
Katessa frowned. I simply meant to ask why an elf would be the best choice for this. He'll be even less suited to the wilderness than I will.
I'll tell you more about him when he arrives.
She looked at Alessander. You're making me wait? What was with people withholding information lately? Alessander nodded. Katessa rolled her eyes. What's the pay for this?
A pouch of gold, and perhaps some information on your parents, if you haven't already learned who they are before the quest is done.
Katessa raised an eyebrow at him. How do you know about that?
I know plenty of things.
That's not comforting.
It's all you need to know.
Katessa drained her mug and set it on the counter. Define a pouch of gold. Alessander pulled a bag of coins from his backpack and handed it to her. The bag weighed heavily in her hand, and she raised an eyebrow at him. That's a hefty sum. She handed the bag back, and he tucked it away.
I think it'll be accurate compensation for the trip.
Katessa's concern was heightened another 10 notches. That was the kind of money you gave someone when you wanted them to assassinate a king, and the risk was death. If it was accurate to the job. Just what do you expect to happen on this trip?
How would I know?
He smirked faintly.
I'm just a bard.
Katessa arched an eyebrow. I really don't like this. He was definitely less trustworthy than anyone else she'd worked with.
You don't have to take the job.
Alessander shrugged.
But you've been hunting for your mother for, what, almost a year? And somehow the person you need is never there? I could have the information you're looking for.
Or this could be a total scam.
Would I risk this much gold on a scam?
If you expect me to die before I get back to claim it. Alessander chuckled.
No, I know you're much more resilient than that. I just want to help Caloris.
Katessa raised an eyebrow. By sending some random people into the harshest region of the country.
I'd go myself if I weren't so old.
I'm sure. Katessa frowned.
You're really not trusting.
You're not giving me much reason to trust you. Alessander sighed.
I don't know what you want me to tell you. It's a dangerous job, but one that's necessary. The Rashan mines affect the whole country. If they've shut down, we have an economic crisis on our hands.
How do you even know about this? Isn't this something the nobles should deal with? Oh yeah, that'd go well. You know what? Don't answer that. I'll take the job, but shouldn't you be assigning us some sort of ranger guide?
You'll find one when the time comes. Trust me.
Alessander tilted his head.
What changed your mind?
Nobles never get anything done. If there is some weight to your theory, I trust myself more than I trust them to fix it. Alessander chuckled.
Fair enough. I'll introduce you to your companion when he arrives in a few days. Good luck.
He stood, cider untouched, and left the tavern. Katessa stared at her empty mug. What on Thamor did I just get myself into? She looked over at Alessander's untouched cider mug and drained it before heading back to the temple. Alright, so as usual, opening lines stuff. So I get the purpose of the opening here. And I think it generally works. Katessa is a roguey, thiefy person who's crouching on a roof and then going into an alley and then a tavern. I like the downward line of description. Maybe focus it more. Maybe laughter after the crouching, and then use a few words to describe the trash in the alley. Is she relieved to be in this small dark place? Like she thinks she was being followed and now knows she's she's safe. The who and where is pretty decent as it is. We know who she is, we know where she is, but I'd suggest adding a bit of tension into the immediate opening, the so what. I am going to carry genre assumptions with me as I go into this, so I am maybe not going to look too terribly closely if I'm just picking this up at the first opening paragraph. If you're... That's me enjoying urban sword and sorcery sort of fantasies. If you're pitching this more to a general fantasy audience, you might want to have a bit more tension in the opening paragraph. I suggest you make the tavern more familiar to her. She just strolls to the front of the tavern and steps inside. Savoring the raucous atmosphere and the sickly sweet smell of alcohol, this place was almost like home. So, if you say this place was like home, your immediate description of it tells us a lot about Contessa. So I suggest you really double up on this. In your submission email, you asked for points to add more description. If you only add description to one part of this chapter, I strongly suggest this be the place you do it. What does the sign look like? What makes the atmosphere raucous? What is the smell of the alcohol in the place? Is it sharp like a cheap ale, or is there a spicy burn of spirits and wine to tell us thief lords might drink here? Does it smell like yeasty brown beer and sweaty, hardworking laborers? All these things give you starting points to draw descriptive lines to the individual patrons, who Contessa could then give brief words to describe how she feels about them, giving us an early look at her character. She makes her way to the counter. Does she have to go around or over anybody to get there? Just give me a better idea of these surroundings. So instead of focusing on Roth's grinning and smirking so much, she really does a lot, which is genre appropriate but annoys me a little bit. Instead of focusing so much on this, maybe take one of these instances and trace a couple of facial features of him. I get a lot of his smirking, his cockiness. I don't get much of a physical description of him, which ordinarily I don't fixate too much on that when it comes to characters, but because he has more lines than almost anybody else in this chapter, drawing a physical line of description for him would probably be appropriate. I feel this early conversation here between Contessa and Roth is kind of small talky. I was bored reading it with the how long did you wait? A while. This sort of stuff. I didn't feel like I was getting much information relating to events or character personalities aside from just some antagonistic flirting between the two of them. Maybe instead of Contessa saying, "I'll have my usual," and this is kind of lame advice, maybe just have Contessa nod to her and have her disappear to the back. This would be equally strong or stronger to show how familiar she is with this person and this location. Let's see. He says, "See you back at the temple." This seems awfully on the nose and spelled out for a couple of secretive assassins in a public tavern. Like, anybody could be hearing this. Maybe everybody in the tavern knows that they go to the temple. I don't know. I don't really have a great sense of who is listening in, who would be listening in, who they fear might be listening in, that sort of stuff. Maybe skip the refill. Have her skip the asking for a refill. Just have her kind of asking tiredly, no, she is still gone. And if she's not been here in 7 months, I don't terribly buy that she would be saying that she's unpredictable. Maybe just, "No, but we expect her back anytime. You'll be the first to know." Just seems like kind of odd wording here. I get what you're doing. I don't know. It's a little unbelievable for me. So now she is Contessa. By the way, something I noticed on my read-aloud read-through, I did not on my first normal read-through. You say she later on without Contessa being the last person referred sometimes. I'll try to find an example here. And of course, now that I'm looking for one, I'm sure I won't be able to. And I suppose you can kind of get away with this because it's a conversation between two people, I suppose, like in this situation. Ordinarily, the rule would be Alexander is the last person who is referenced, so you really shouldn't be saying she next, since Alexander is not the person you're referencing. It kind of works here. An actual editor might give you more accurate advice on that. I'll just, I don't know, mark that. Can I find a better example? Right here, maybe avoid starting so many paragraphs so close together with the same weak pronoun. Right, I am not going to be able to find the example I thought I was going to have. But I caught a couple little things along the way. Hopefully they were helpful. Okay, scanning unfamiliar figures. Where was that? She turns her attention to the tavern's patrons, looking for anyone she hadn't seen before. There was a short list considering how often she came. I think scanning unfamiliar figures, that was my note, would work better next to that was a short list than looking for anyone she hadn't seen before. That's just a little personal preference thing. All the young faces, younger faces. This makes me think that there are new conscripts in the guard or something. A little bit of description linking the new people to something would be nice. I am assuming this is some kind of foreshadowing for something coming later. It is a nice little bit of a character. She's look at these little young people, these fresh faces. They have no idea the kind of stuff that's going on around them. Right. Dum-de-dum. I do like the bit of the... I like bards. Bards are great. When you say however here, our adventurers, bards, etc. would speak in hushed tones of long ago wars and almost wars. Today, however, everyone's attention turned to the bard telling Rosen's ballad. I think this is technically correct. You're drawing attention to the tone shift between hushed tones and everybody listening to a bard. I don't like this because on the one hand you're saying, ordinarily, bards would tell stories. Tonight, however, a bard is telling a story. I don't know that that works great because this is almost exactly what's happening. Excuse me. So this took me aback when you pointed out the heat. Is the opening of the story back here. You are describing summer, the midsummer humidity. This made me think it was really hot out. I don't know if the implication is just now at night it's cold and so they have to have a fire inside, but when I read this line, the fire provided more heat, I thought, wait a second, it's summer. Why do they have the fire on at all? The bit, her soul was too dark to be seen. Super, super edgy, but works in genre. I love it. I don't care for the bard announcing out loud about the quest and then calling to Contessa like that. It doesn't seem like something you would do to a known rogue, thiefy, assassin-y person. That sounds like a great way to get them to jump up and run away. This is a tiny little suggestion, going back to the telling of the story. Maybe have him deliberately tell some things wrong in the story to irritate her. Like he clearly has information on her. He has some intelligence on her. Maybe he chose a story he knew she was really familiar with or liked, and he told it in a way to irritate her, and then sits down next to her and lets her tell him how much of an idiot he was, how wrong he was, to bait her into a conversation. It's just a dumb little idea. Take it or leave it. So you say Alexander's name here somewhere before he actually introduces himself. That's just a little typo. And I suggest giving maybe a brief physical description of him, more than you already have. maybe just some concrete features. I don't really like how Alexander tries to test her when she already needs to be convinced that the mission is worth the time. If he really wants her, this feels like something so basic. I feel like I'm just missing the point of the conversation. But upon reading it, I felt frustrated. I felt if he really wants her for the job, shouldn't he be trying to make a really attractive offer? If he knows she won't be able to refuse, he should just state so and then say he'll see her tomorrow. I kind of feel like you're trying to mix a few different classic tavern inciting incidents here. It just makes me feel like the bard is an obtuse old man, which I guess he kind of is. It works for him, so I guess good for him. And this conversation between Alexander and Contessa, it's similar to the one with Roth in that I feel it maybe goes on for a little longer than it needs to. There's a bit of repetitious thought, a little back and forth of, do this. Yeah, I don't know if I want to do this. Yeah, but you should do this though. Yeah. Are you going to do this? I might. This is a recurring thing I see with the dialogue in here. Maybe just be aware of the goal of conversations, the goals that characters have when they're conversing with each other. There's a great resource. I forget who wrote it. I will link it in the description below. It is a description of different kinds of conversation based on what is to be accomplished by the conversation. It's maybe a thing you'll find interesting. I'll just link that below. Okay, so she has the conversation with Alexander. She leaves. All right, I am having a bit of a difficult time picturing this environment in my mind. You might want to describe, again, how it was a particularly uncharacteristically cold night at the very beginning, so I know it's night immediately. I didn't really get that it was, like, midnight at the moment. I was, for some reason, picturing, like, late afternoon, early evening, initially. Because you're describing it as summer, but also describing the middle as cool, so I thought, okay, maybe the sun's starting to go down, we're getting evening. That was just a dumb assumption on my part. Now you say it's midnight, I suggest putting that, like, immediately. It's pretty atmospheric, having someone crouching on a rooftop at midnight, more so than just somebody crouching on a rooftop. So that'd be a great opportunity. What other people are about in the city this late at night? Can you describe for me sensations of the city? I do like your description of the temple. Very nice. The Temple of War loomed above her minutes later. Black spires jutted into the sky, tipped with red metal like blood on a spear. Just beautiful. The windows were tinted glass. The ornate carvings were on the red marble pillars, portraying bloody battle scenes and wars. Does she have any personal connection to any of the stories portrayed by this? Are these windows stained glass? These aren't necessarily important details, but just kind of questions I was wondering of. So she goes down, she goes in. I suggest describing the sanctuary. Before that, is the temple empty besides her? I mean, besides the basement. Does she need to go into a secret door or anything to get inside this temple, or is it just unlocked at midnight? How certain is Contessa that no one is following her? What kind of altar, idols, etc. are in the sanctuary of this temple? What is it like being in the heart of the Temple of War? Give me a sense of the sort of worshippers who would come to a temple like this. Okay. Dungeons. Lovely, lovely. That the dungeons are no longer in use is interesting and has lore implications. It implies maybe civilization has moved past the point of bloody wars requiring prisons like this, or maybe that the church itself is a remnant of a darker time, maybe a new religion has been instated, or there's just a better prison building to use. It can mean any one of these things. It sparks my imagination. It's a good starting point for something. Good job there. So she goes down the dungeon shelf, shivers up her spine. I am guilty of using this too. It is a cliche. Maybe drop that. Cobwebs in human bones. That is nasty. Have these people not cleaned up the place that they meet constantly and take their children to? Doesn't sound very sanitary at all. I would like some description of the common room. I like that you compare it to the tavern. Maybe use some more explicit language additionally to compare it. A comparison of the crowds and stuff would be nice. I say crowds. The crowd of the tavern versus the assassins here. Your brief traits attributed to the other guild members are good. You use just brief physical descriptions that work really well. Middle-aged, brown hair, matching eyes, red-haired young woman. The Roth's brother, Payne. I think when I read this wrong. I think Payne was the one speaking in this paragraph. I didn't realize this. He doesn't seem to have any kind of an identity compared with the other people described here. I don't know. He doesn't seem to have, like, anything really separating him from Roth. This could easily have just been Roth. Is this Roth? I really don't know. I think it is Roth. I think Roth was the one talking. I don't know that it would make sense for Payne to have this bit about the cupcakes. Aside from that, I was very easily able to keep everybody separated. Good job. Food. Alright, so she comes down into this dungeon filled with webs and bones, probably swarming with rats and roaches, for some jerky. Why didn't she eat at the actual tavern where they have, like, hot food instead of risking nasty meat in a nasty place? I mean, it's jerky. I know they prepared it. I know it's not going to be actually nasty meat, but, like, I would rather eat nicer food in a nicer place than eat some really nasty food or some really plain food just because I'm going to be around some guys at the end of a long day. That's just me. Katessa should probably have more initial questions and concerns about her job. About why she's just able to keep the thing she took. That sounds weird to me. I would be maybe assuming some kind of a conspiracy, feeling a bit paranoid if that sort of thing was happening to me. And I don't even work for assassins. I'm not even an assassin myself. Again, with a conversation that's just antagonistic sparring between Roth and Katessa. Maybe this is just par for the course for this sort of, like, YA-ish fantasy. I don't read a ton of that, so I don't know. It just kind of had me bashing my head against the keyboard whenever Roth opened his mouth. I don't know, he's just teasing every time he speaks, like he's not actually trying to get any information or anything, which is an issue when I, as the reader, am eagerly waiting for that information. He just kind of seems in general a little toxic and oppressive, and I hope Katessa finds someone better to flirt with. Do all these people live in the temple? They have rooms in the dungeon. And see, he has his little office in the dungeon. They have the rooms. Why do they live in the dungeon, if so, of this temple? If they're skilled and probably well-paid assassins, I would imagine at least some of them would have private houses or apartments that would be nicer to live in. The crypticness of everybody. I know Katessa bemoans it, but I am also thinking this reading it. It's driving me crazy, wishing that somebody would say something of some substance. Maybe, and then Roth keeps going on about it. This is the pouch here. I know you mentioned before, and context tells me that this is the thing she stole. Maybe use some specific explicit language to clarify that here. And maybe describe briefly how Contessa feels about the job she did. Was it unnecessarily dangerous? Does she feel angry that she put herself at high risk only to have Druin say, yeah, just keep the brooch, figure out what it means, lol. Was it a terribly simple and boring job and she feels like wasted talent? She said she doesn't like jobs inside the city, and this is a good opportunity for showing us why, showing her personality. Oh, that poor barmaid. That poor woman. Working all day, all night. The cider. This is just a dumb nitpick. To my knowledge, by default in the Middle Ages, cider, and I know this isn't literally Middle Ages, our world, Europe, but in the Middle Ages, in our world, England, cider was hard by default, and soft cider was called apple water or apple drink or something like that. Not a big deal at all, just seems kind of anachronistic. So you mentioned elves here at the end of this chapter. And this is news to me that we're dealing with non-humans. Definitely good job putting it in chapter 1. Maybe make mention of other non-humans earlier in the chapter. Not necessarily that she's around non-humans, but just some, I don't know, some mention that lets me know that is what we're going to be dealing with. Good job, again, doing it in chapter 1 anyway. It's definitely not something you would want to wait for later chapters to introduce that kind of a world-building element. I kind of want to see Contessa, she's getting frustrated. I kind of want to see her just like snap at the end of this and be like, all right, I'm not doing anything unless I get some information as to what's going on around here. You people are all just jerking me around, having me do all your dirty work for you, and I'm tired of just being out of the loop. How can you expect me to be doing stuff if I don't even know what's going on? Accurate compensation seems like odd wording. Appropriate compensation might be better wording. And likewise, somehow the person you need is never there. That's kind of odd wording. It's odd phrasing, kind of vague. I generally, finally, just think Contessa should be more paranoid about this offer. She probably has really powerful enemies. I mean, she just stole something from the king. She literally went and did this and then suddenly is talking to a guy who seems to know a lot about her. That would raise gigantic red flags to me. I'm sure she has powerful enemies and should be trying to get to the bottom of whatever's going on before she agrees to do anything. She's valuable and skilled. She has like all the leverage in this situation, but she's just letting herself get pushed around by this spoony bard man. Aside from that, really, I wonder if this is going to be foreshadowing of any kind. Did he put something in his cider to bait her into drinking it? I don't know, maybe it's a tracking beacon. General, I enjoyed this. Thank you very much, RM Archer, for submitting another project for us. This was a fun read. I love reading stuff like this. I love stories about assassins and temples of war and bards and all that sort of stuff. I look forward maybe to seeing more from you in the future. Those of you who are watching, please leave a constructive comment for Archer, if you will. And please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much. See you later.